Okay, next we're going to have a look at the fuel tank. So with the body now mounted back on properly, all the bolts snagged down, there's no reason we can't put the fuel tank and the fuel line back in again and try and make sure our fuel pump's working. Hang on. Wait for the police car to go past. Yeah, get the fuel tank plumb back in. There are a couple of the flexible joints on the fuel tank, like that one there, which have perished, so I do need to swap those out, and I still need length of that same hose to go between the carbs as well. And of course I need to figure out actually where the fuel line goes. I figured out how the fuel tank fits in the back. Obviously it fits in on top of that hump there. One slight snag, you can see the previous owner has painted it in this rather fetching silver. However, I flushed it with a bit of white spirit yesterday because there was some sediment in the bottom, so I thought I'd give it a quick flush around and get all that sediment out. And when I left it stood up, I noticed it was leaking. So I came to this corner and I buzzed the corner back because there was a load of fiberglass resin on it, and lo and behold, you can see in there, there's holes. So I think it was leaking from this corner, it wasn't leaking from the other corner, so I think what I need to do is buzz this back to flat metal, make a plate to go over that. I need to obviously see how bad these holes are, how far out these holes go, buzz it back, and then we'll make a plate and we'll weld the plate over that. I hasten to add that the fuel tank has been in the sun with the top off all night. So in terms of fumes, reaction from welding, because I've had white spirit in it, I think it'll be absolutely fine. Either way, we'll give it a quick blowout with some compressed air first. So yeah, need to buzz this back first of all, see how bad the rust is, and then let's make a plate up and get this tank secure. Okay, so we buzz the corner of that back, and as you can see there's a few holes in around that area. Seems to be fine outside of that though. So we've made ourselves a little plate to go over that. Just 1mm mild steel. Buzz the edges back. We'll get that tacked on, hammered into shape, seamed up, and then we should be good to go. Okay, and there's our replacement patch welded in. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to go around the edges with some of the chemical metal we've used on the chassis, just to really get in there and fill those edges, because I know with welding it might look like it's perfectly in there, flat and watertight, but it might not be as well. So yeah, we'll give it a whip over with a bit of chemical metal at the same time, just to make sure it is all nicely sealed, and then we can repaint it, and obviously that's going to give it a little bit of protection as well. Right, so the fuel tank's done. It's all patched up, it's been checked, it's all watertight, which is great. So we're shaking any of this sediment out of the bottom of it, and we're just leaving it in the sun now to evaporate and get everything out of it and dry it out inside. Consequently, it's another lovely day in the southwest. Sunshine, hot tubs on, beers in the fridge. It's the way to go. So what we have also done is we've pulled the sender for the fuel tank unit. So again, apologies for the noise, I've got the doors open there for a minute, just to get the car back up on the ramps again. So yeah, so I've pulled the fuel sender. So I did quickly have a look through the Haynes manual to try and find out the... Hang on, I'm going to shut this door. Right, there we go, that's better. Yeah, one of the downsides of living on a main road. In fact, it's all downsides, isn't it? So I had a quick look through the Haynes manual to find which wires go to the sender for the fuel tank, and it would appear that it is a green wire with a black stripe. And where's it gone? I had it here yesterday. So I had a look in the Haynes manual to try and find the wires for it, because obviously the wiring looms are all pulled apart in the back, and the fuel tank unit there is number 52, and if we go up to 52 on the schematic, it's there. So we see we have a black earth coming off it, and the wire that goes to it should be green and black, that GB there. Obviously you've got your codes down here, so it's predominantly green with a black stripe. So we're looking for a green wire with a black stripe, and on part of the loom that comes down the side of the car to the rear, which has got all the lights and all the rest of it on it, there is indeed a wire that is green with a black stripe with a spade terminal on the end, and there is one next to it which is black, also with a spade terminal. So that must be it, right? This must be the sender for the fuel tank, the wiring for the fuel sender. So this has obviously got an analog switch inside it, like a potentiometer, variable resistor, that sort of thing. Obviously it doesn't give a digital device, would give you a true or false reading, on or off, but obviously this car is pre-digital, so everything is analog, and obviously this has increments on it. A fuel tank isn't just empty or full, it is partial. So obviously you've got your float here attached to this little arm, and as the fuel increases, same as the cistern valve in the toilet, the float comes up, and this then gives you the reading back to your fuel gauge down there somewhere about how much fuel is in your tank. So I need to ascertain whether this is working or not, because I've plugged it in on those wires, I've turned the ignition on, and the fuel gauge doesn't move. So I'm guessing fuel gauges don't actually need the car to be running. That wouldn't make much sense. I'm pretty sure every other car I've ever had, the fuel gauge goes up when you turn the ignition on. I've tried the wires both way around on the terminals, still no joy. So there's two things I need to try. Well, what I'm going to do is a continuity test, because you've got this big connector here, which sits under in the passenger thing, passenger glove box, parcel shelf. And obviously it's a bit dusty, it's a bit dirty. I have cleaned the connections up a little bit and pushed them together, because obviously the wiring comes from the back of the car here, goes down the side of the car, goes to that block where it meets the loom for the rest of the car. So if you haven't got that block plugged in, obviously you're not going to get any readings at the back of the car on your gauge. Plug that in, still not working. So I think the easiest thing to do will be to pull that centre panel out so I can get to the back of the gauges. It's only 4 screws and the 2 little knobs for the heater controls, although they are a right bastard to get off because one of them's a bit threaded. In fact, I can't remember how I got it off last time. I'll find out. Pull those screws out, pull the gauge forward, and then I can do a continuity test on my multimeter from the spade connections down here to the terminals on the back of the fuel gauge. If I am getting a positive reading, I'm getting good continuity across those wires, then it means that either the fuel gauge is faulty or this is faulty. And if I'm not getting any continuity on the wires, it means there's a break somewhere in the wiring, most probably at that connector block, which probably just needs pulling apart and cleaning up. It is dirty, dusty, there's some overspray on it and that sort of thing, so I might get some contact cleaner in there and flush it out. But that'll be the simplest thing to do, I think. If this fuel sender is faulty, I mean, I'm quite tempted to take it apart. It looks like it has 2 rivets in it, one here and one here, and then you've just got these 3 little tabs which have been folded over. So I should be able to drill those rivets out, unbend those tabs, and then get inside and have a look and clean any connections in there, should it need it. So let's do the continuity test first of all. Let's get that dash apart and see again, and see if in fact no, I'm not going to pull the dash apart. Let's just reach up behind, take the knob off the back of the fuel tank retaining thingy, and then drop that fuel gauge forwards. The other problem is, because I've got the car up on the ramps now, because I want to get underneath, I need to find another bolt. I need to go and buy one of these. I'm not going to get one of these from a shop, but I'll be able to get a modern metric equivalent. And also I need to do the brake lines at the back of the car, so I'll put her back up on the ramps again. And the problem is now I have that much space to walk through. Okay, so we've got our multimeter set to continuity. So if you touch the 2 pins together, you get a tone. So we've got one end attached into the green and black, which is coming from the loom at the rear of the car. And the other one we've got is the green and black on the back of the fuel gauge. So, with one pressed into that spade and one up here, we should get a tone. Okay, so that means we're getting continuity through that loom. It's going from the back of the gauge into that connector block, down through the side of the car and back up to where I'm sat now. So the wiring is good. So that must mean if the temperature gauge isn't working, it should be the sender unit. So I believe we should be able to do a resistance test on that, so bear with me. Okay, so we've changed our voltmeter to read resistance. We've currently got it set at 2k ohms, and with both the pins attached to both of the spades on the back of the sender units, we are reading about 200-ish with it closed. So what we should find is, if I bring this into the shot, if I now start to increase the level on the float, we should see that reading start to go up. Hard to do with one hand. Hang on, finger there, there we go. Up to 400-ish. So 400 when the float is all the way at the top, and then as we decrease the float, it comes back down again. So that says to me that that sender unit is working. So if the sender unit is working and the fuel gauge is working, well, we don't know the fuel gauge is working, do we? We know the continuity is good, but we don't know if the actual gauge itself is working. What we need to do is pass a voltage through that gauge to see if the needle moves. So that's the next job. So like all jobs, when you've got something to fix, it's a process of elimination, isn't it? So we know the wiring is good because we tested the continuity all the way from the gauge through the loom back to the spades. We know the sender unit is working because we're getting a variable reading down there on our resistance. So now we need to make sure the actual gauge itself is working. So what I need is, I suppose I could pass 12 volts through it straight from the battery. It is a 12 volt appliance, so we should be able to do that. Shouldn't for I think they're 10 volts because they have a voltage regulator which comes off the back of the Speedo. So what I could do is see if I can find a 9 volt battery in the house and then make up some terminals for that. Yeah, we'll do that. We'll test it with 9 volts because if it's got a voltage regulator bringing it down to 10, I don't want to zap 12 volts straight from the battery through because I could kill it. So that's assuming it is actually still alive. So let's go and find a battery. Okay, couldn't find a 9 volt battery, but I do have a 7.4 volt lithium polymer airsoft battery, which should do the same job. When fully charged, they sit at about 8 volts. So all we've done is jammed a couple of wires into the connector there with open ends. So if we take this to the fuel gauge, then we should get a reading. So let's try and do that. And this is going to be quite awkward with the camera, so I'm going to try and set the camera up somewhere so you can see the fuel gauge. So bear with. There we go. That fuel gauge is climbing. So with the battery back off again, that should start to drop back again. Okay, cool. So that fuel gauge is working. So let's pull these wires out before we have a short circuit. So apologies if you couldn't see that very well. I had to balance the camera on the handbrake. So if the sender unit is working and the gauge is working and the wiring's good, then there should be no reason why I don't get a reading at the fuel gauge with the ignition on and the sender attached. So let's put it all back together again and see what happens. Okay, wires attached to the sender, ignition on, push the float, and nothing. Okay, clearly something is amiss. Well, that's annoying. I might be doing something completely wrong here, I don't know. Could be something to do with the wiring on the fuel gauge, maybe the voltage stabilizer, I don't know. I suppose I could actually, with the ignition on, take a volt reading at the back of the fuel gauge. So let's try that. Okay, so with the ignition on, I'm getting about 3 volts. It's not stable, I have to move the pins around a little bit, but I'm only getting about 3 volts at the back of the fuel gauge, which doesn't seem to be enough. So whether that means that the battery needs charging, or is it the voltage stabilizer on the back of the speedo? I don't know. I really don't know. Okay, I've cracked it. It was the earth. The earth on the fuel gauge doesn't go back to the earth on the dash. It earths back there in the corner on the chassis where the lights go. So right now my fuel gauge is showing 0. I think it's working in reverse because this is when I drop this rather than increase it. But if I drop this all the way, ta-da! Fuel gauge moves. So as I say, it seems to be working in reverse. I'm guessing it should be that way up, and then as you put fuel in, the float increases. Or maybe it's the other way up. Maybe it's that way up, and then when you put the fuel in, it increases that way, maybe? Don't know, I'll have to have a look at the tank and work it out, but either way, it doesn't matter, it's only a case of swapping a wire if it is the wrong way round. But either way, that fuel gauge is working, so I'm happy with that. So, what I can do now is go ahead, once my fuel tank is completely bone dry on the inside, I can bolt my fuel tank back in, start to reroute my fuel lines. I do need to go and buy some more fuel lines, all the rubber fuel lines have perished. And then once I've got my fuel lines going to the fuel pump, and I get my bit of fuel line to go between the 2 pots on the carbs, wherever they are, there and there, then there's no reason I can't get this started and ticking over. Oh, and I also need to cap off that extra, water thing, because again, I'm not too sure what it's for. Everything else, all the water's plumbed in, so I don't know what the extra one's for, but either way, bit of rubber tube, Jubilee clip, and a bolt in there, and she'll be good. Fill it with water, get it running, test the alternator, blah blah blah, test the clutch, all that good stuff, and we're a bit further forward, so cool. Okay, well I'm happy with that, so might call it a day and have some lunch.